utilities or perch. We can tell what how that energy flow is in the system.
How viable a veliger is after a certain amount of time in a built. And it turns out they're pretty fragile.
What happens if we had a second one? You know, what if spiny water flea shows up? And then what happens if a third one shows up? It becomes more and more challenging.
To the 18 to 23 inch slots. And then one that we probably wish wasn't there. 2012, we first found the zebra mussel veligers, and by last summer they covered nearly every hard surface in the lake. During the presentation, it's a little more lengthy than I'd like to have it, but I felt we needed to cover a little bit of the historical perspective and a lot of different areas of what's going on in Winnie. So I'm going to break it into several different sections. And after each section, then we'll take a little bit of a break and open it up for questions, because if you're like me, you won't remember what your question was by the time we get to the end. So first we'll address the zebra mussel infestation, and then the status of the walleye population, what we need to have a good walleye population, and is it present in the lake? What management changes we have done to try to address some situations. Now this is all walleye, and then we'll get into a little bit of some other important species in the lake. Some things that I'm going to fall into jargon. I know I am, so I figured I'd better introduce you to a few terms before we get started. Spawning stock biomass. That's the pounds of female walleye, adult female walleye in the lake, and we talk about it in pounds per acre. Recruitment, in this, it can have a lot of different meanings in different situations, but for this meeting, we're just talking about walleyes that live past their first birthday, so they've made it through their first summer and their first winter. That's an area of very high mortality. If they live past that, they're likely to survive more than if you measure them before they go through that first winter. Total dissolved solids. That's just basically dissolved minerals in the water. It creates some of the color in the water. And then veliger, it's an immature zebra mussel. Starting out, the thing we all notice the most, the changes in the water, we can see a lot farther down than we used to. This graph is a little bit complicated. Over here on the vertical axis, we have total dissolved solids. That is the blue dash line, and over here we have the measurements of the Secchi disk, which is the solid red line. And the trend that we see is over time, this goes from 1986, we started measuring in 86, so it goes from 86 through present, and we see a pretty flat trend in the Secchi disk, which is the water clarity, until we get into the early 2000s. Then we start an increase, and as we get towards present time, when the zebra mussels are in the lake, we see a rapid increase. So the water's getting clearer. The total dissolved solids, it's the other way. Now that's those minerals in the water. We see after 2000, we see a slow decline, but when we get to the zebra mussel era, we see a more rapid decline and much more variability in the sampling. This is a Secchi disc. It's a 8-inch disc. It's black, white, black, white. We drop it down in the water. When it disappears, we lift up. That's our Secchi disc, where we start to see it again. So we have decrease in the total dissolved solids and an increase in the Secchi disc, or visibility. What's causing some of that? Well, early on in 2000, we had the faucet snail. It is a filter feeder. We don't know for certain that was causing the water clearing from 2000 to about 2013, but it's likely it had some impact. The majority of the water clearings, these critters, these white spots with the cross in them, that's the juvenile zebra mussels, the veliger. You see these guys up here, these little ones? They're just hatched, very young. They get larger and larger and larger until about this size, and then they settle out of the system. That's a couple-week time period when they're floating around in the water column here, and when they settle out, if they settle on a hard surface, they attach, and that's when they start filtering the water. Other things that are in this slide that are really necessary for a Winnie fish population to survive are all these little animals. These are the zooplankers we'll talk about later on in the presentation. And if you look really close, I'm looking really close, see these fuzzy little things? Those are phytoplankers, the aquatic plants, very small microscopic aquatic plants out there that are really the base of the food web. You guys been in the shoreline cruising around? You see little black spots all over where there didn't used to be black spots? That's clams loaded with zebra mussels. This is a 1-year accumulation of zebra mussels in a temperature logger string that we put out in January 1st. We pull it the next January 1st. The only reason there's any open spots in here is because we knocked them off pulling them out of the ice, through the ice. There's a geneticist down at the University of Minnesota that is working on zebra mussels in the state of Minnesota and trying to figure out genetically what genetic makeup do they have. And what he's found is that they're being brought into Minnesota. He doesn't know from where yet because that work hasn't been done. But in Minnesota, we know they're coming in from far away. And you see, let's use this Alexandria area. You have one population that's that blue, and you see that greenish blue, that's a second population, and I wish I wasn't twitching so much. And then that's a third population right there. All three of those populations were brought from someplace else, and they're distinct from each other. So we have 3, 4, 5 populations in this graph. Mille Lacs is separate. It is only in Mille Lacs, it's not anywhere else in Minnesota. Now we get to a little closer to home. You have the Brainerd population of zebra mussels, genetically different than all those others that we just talked about, but genetically identical to the Cass and Winnie zebra mussels. So the story that I would take from this is that we as anglers really have to be careful about our equipment. This is a local spread. It didn't come from outside the state. It came from within the state, and somehow they got from here to here. Can't say exactly how, but it was people that moved them. So what do zebra mussels do once they get into the lake? Well, we all know they clear the water, right? But how do they clear the water? Well, on the left here, this is Lake Michigan without zebra mussels. The phytoplankton making 70 to 80% of the population. Zooplankton 10 to 15%, and then some benthic scavengers, a very small 6 to 9%. Well, all of this is the building blocks for the fish population. So on the right we have with the mussels. What happened? We've severely reduced our phytoplankton, severely reduced our zooplankton, and tremendously increased the mussels, the bottom, the things that live on the bottom. So what it's doing is it's converting all this energy that used to be in the middle that went to fish. Now it's taking all that energy and it's converting it to the bottom. Now that may still go to fish, but usually there's different fish that use the bottom than use the middle water column. Right now there's some work that Minnesota DNR researchers are doing that includes Winnie, where we're tracking that movement of that mid-level energy and seeing where the heck it goes. Basically, a fish is what they eat, and we're able to take flesh plugs and measure what they ate by examining other things that they eat, like fish or tullibees or perch. We can tell what they ate, so we can tell how that energy flow is in the system. Oh, I forgot something very kind of neat. This up here, this green water, this used to be green. 5 mussels in it, 1/2 hour time period. Okay, I ran through that pretty quick because I don't want to keep you folks here all night. This is the end of the first part of the presentation. Any questions about the zebra mussels and how they affect the lake? Yes?
It seems that, now that we're stuck with them, easiest way to get these mussels spread from lake to lake is in the veliger form. Because you get all these boats, none of them drain their villages decent. You can pull the plug and drive uphill for 10 miles, and a week later you pull out your driveway, water still comes out of the bilge, even though the plug has been pulled the whole time. I can't believe, the veliger must be an easier critter to kill than a zebra mussel itself.
Well, I'm gonna pass
But I-
this off to Rich, because Rich is the
I think
expert on.
I talked to him a couple of years ago on my idea of it. I can't believe he can't come up with some type of a chemical that can be like an Alka-Seltzer tablet that turns chartreuse when it gets wet. Throw it in your bilge, to where the water that's sloshed around your bilge would mix with that, kill whatever's in there. You pull your plug, you drive down the road, DNR can see green coming out of your hole. You know you pulled the plug. But at least, because, you know, we're gonna do all we can to kill the things and not transport them, but give us a couple tools to do it, we'd be glad to do it. But I can't believe they can't come up with something that'll kill them little.
People are working on those kinds of things. Again, another study at the university is going on that is actually studying how viable a veliger is after a certain amount of time in a bilge. And it turns out they're pretty fragile.
What they have.
I mean, like hours, not days, fragile. So by I'm not trying to belittle, it's a great idea. It's a
Well, there's
cool
guys go
thing.
from lake to lake in the same day,
Exactly.
so that would take care of it.
Yep. Still, lots of veligers have to be released in order for a few of them to survive and establish a population, you know, the whole thing. So certainly that is a pathway that we're certain has been, you know, used to move these things around. But we're also beginning to look now at some other pathways, and we're quite concerned about stuff like boat lifts, docks, swim platforms that come with ready-made turnkey breeding populations. And we know that a lot of those have happened in the state now. There's new rules, regulations, and laws in place to try to prevent that from happening. So it does happen on a daily basis, you know, like we might be moving the veligers around, but there's more than one way for these things to get moved around, and lots of different rules and regulations and thoughts to have, as you know, fishermen, boat people, whatever, when we're moving equipment.
I'm wondering, in the lake, the villagers have a certain lifespan. Is there a certain period of the summer where the villager concentration is the highest?
Yep.
And if so, you know, with the Winnie Dam, if it's a narrow time frame, you could close that Winnie Dam and prevent the spread downstream during that period. I was just wondering, what is the concentration? Say if you got cubic yard of water, how many villagers are in there, say early spring, midsummer, late summer? Does it vary much over the year?
Okay. Fortunately, we decided a couple of years ago to look at that. And we studied a lake in the southern part of the state. We studied a lake near Brainerd. We studied Sand Lake. We knew there was a good population up there. Found out that what's called spawning, the reproductive season, starts right around when temperatures get around 60 degrees. And that, for 3 years in a row, has been around that early part of June. Once that happens, it takes just a little bit, and then once it kind of gets kick-started, and by middle of June through mid to late August, you can expect that Sand Lake, or Winnie now, will have a pretty good population of veligers floating around. And it isn't all just a constant thing. There are peaks, right? Because there's only so much energy that a zebra mussel can have to spawn. It has to take a rest for a while and then spawn again. So there are these veliger peaks, but all summer, unfortunately, is when peak veliger production happens. Don't remember specifics. Gerry helped me out, but just last summer, a bunch of plankton samples were taken to determine veliger numbers, and we found the highest concentrations in Winnie that we found in even Mille Lacs or any of the other lakes so far. So they're doing well in Winnie, at least they did last year. And I can't share numbers, I can't remember off the top of my head what they were.
I don't have the exact numbers either, but there's a scientist that works for the state, Gerry Albert, that evaluates all of these and created that slide with all the veligers on it. And his statement was that the veliger abundance on Winnie last summer was higher than any he's ever seen.
So there we've got that. So June to August, high veliger production, the whole dam thing. They're beneath the dam already. We found it several years ago, and last year we looked in the spillway. Little Winnie's got them, and we found them a little bit down, about a mile down the actual river from Little Winnie.
And Winnie hits 60 degrees in early June and doesn't go below 60 degrees until you're into mid-September, so that's a long time.
Can we get some clarification on the strain of zebras that you said you found? So in Winnie, the strain is related to sand?
No.
Okay, no, so I wanted to know that.
The whole point behind doing that was Dr. McCartney was hired and he was told, here, fix this problem. And so he had to start someplace. So he decided he would look at, again, he's a geneticist, so they mapped the zebra mussel genome, right? Which is 10 years ago something that would have been impossible, but they've done it in just a couple of years. Once you map it, then they can start looking at specifics. And what he found was, this is just kind of an excerpt of the map, but, okay, let's go back one more. Gerry pointed out, these are, well, first you do your genetics and then you run some statistics, and he found out that, statistical results show that these organisms, they're all zebra mussels, and they're all they have the same genetic, just like we're all humans, but we all have different characteristics. These mussels here, there's several chains, lake chains over here, which makes sense because if they're established in one of the upper lakes, they tend to move downstream. These are all very closely related. As are these groups, the DL groups, are very closely related. Whitefish, gull, pelican, Brainerd area, very closely related. Not so much between here and not so much between here. But what the interesting part there was, and I think the point that Gerry's trying to make is, yeah, these guys, our mussels in this neck of the woods are the same genetic makeup as the Brainerd area. Now these have been, whitefish was 2012, 2010, 2012. Gull was the same year, and pelican was 2013. So they all sort of got introduced in this neck of the woods a few years earlier. And then we don't know Mille Lacs. Mille Lacs, Dr. McCartney is also looking regionally. So he's looking at Wisconsin, he's looking at Michigan, Indiana, when he can, and when he can get samples. Right now, Mille Lacs is very distinctly different than any other lakes in the state, as is sand. So where they came from, we don't know, but we know that they're different than these other groups.
So that would seem to imply to me that, given the amount of boat traffic that is going from, say, Winnie to Sand on a daily basis, and in the lakes, that it implies that there's probably the introductions then are not coming from boats, but are coming from the boat lifts, boat docks, and whatever. I mean,
Might well have been, because, we weren't really tuned into that pathway, if you want to call it that. And one thing we don't know, and I should probably point this out too, what happens here if Mille Lacs gets put here and then they start to breed, right? So you can still have that genetic interaction. We haven't seen that yet. We haven't looked that deep yet. So there could be more than one introduction that's happened. So the boat lift thing is, like I said, it's a turnkey breeding population, and it can take off, and you know how populations increase. They don't go like this, they go exponentially. So it doesn't take very long for 1,000 organisms to become 10,000, and boom, the next thing you know, Sand Lake happens. So
Has it been looked into the diving ducks at all? Because I look at the state and how you had that broke up there, and it really seems to me that they're massive resting areas for ducks, and the flyways are, you can see it in almost the color of the graph.
some work has been done. Again, you're going to be moving veligers if that's the case.
Yeah.
Very fragile organism. I'm not going to stand here and tell you it wouldn't happen.
Okay.
But if it did, why wouldn't we see them? I mean, there's other places where mussels should be showing up too, and they don't necessarily do that.
Composition of the bottom of the lake.
The example that you used was Europe. Was it the Baltic Sea or? Yes. That question was asked at a presentation that was last week, and okay.
I can't remember how it went.
Well, the Caspian Sea had the zebra mussels, and then there was a channel that was cut between the Caspian Sea and a freshwater body of work, and the water. And the mussels moved into that freshwater body. And this was pre-industrial revolution that this occurred. Then they sat there. They didn't move anywhere for many, many, many years. Then a started on that lake, and all of a sudden they started to move. And they have the same duck movements and animal movements there that we have here. And the example that he used was that it was unlikely to be the ducks because there was such a long time period that they just sat there. And then you brought in humans and they started to move. So, and what he said is looking at these on a larger scale was that they don't follow flyways or any known animal movement, but they do follow the human movement from one large fishing lake to another large fishing lake.
Gerry, I got two things. One, isn't it true that the ballast from the ships is what originally they thought was what brought the zebras in, correct?
That's what people think, yes.
Okay, and the other thing is, and this is moving farther than this, you got clear water on Cass Lake, and you got zebras there. And why is the walleye fishing so good and the numbers so high on Cass right now as opposed to Winnie?
Weird.
And I know I just want to bump into that because it's an issue that a lot of people here want to know, and if you're going to talk about it, then I'll wait.
That's a part of the presentation a little bit later.
All right.
One question. How does, when you transport a dock, let's say you brought one up from bringing it up to sand, let's say that there's a lot of zebra mussels in the adult form stuck on there. Do they live very long?
Depends on.
Because it could dry out. You think it'd dry out between here and there. And then
Think about a dock. Here's the deal with those. We bring a dock or a boat lift, and we're going to do the right thing, and we get our pressure washer out and clean that outside perfectly. If you ever notice a lot of the stanchions on docks and lifts and that kind of thing, is take the rubber cap off and lift down. I had some really cool pictures of this. There are entire breeding populations inside those stanchions, because when they're microscopic, when they're veligers, they can get into small nooks and crannies and holes, and then they grow up and become adults inside there. It's a perfect breeding ground. So that's how. It may look perfectly clean on the outside, may have been sterilized and great looking, but there's still this huge population growing inside the tubes, which is why there's a new rule that got put in place recently that requires equipment like that to be cleaned and stored for 21 days before it can go back into a lake someplace. And we're hoping that that's going to, so that answers that other question. Usually a couple of weeks. A DNR fish guy down in Aiken, who had a lot to do with studying that zebra mussel population, took a batch on a rock or a clam just for something to do. He's a curious guy. Put them on his windowsill. And they sat there for 10 days or 2 days, I can't remember the whole, but a long time, more than several days. And most of them closed up and they quit breathing, or they didn't look healthy or whatever, and whatever it was. 10 days later, he put the rock back into a pot of water. Most of the mussels had died at that point, but a few of them opened up and started siphoning again. So on those cool, wet June years, when it's humid out all the time and it's not hot and sunny, several days is not uncommon for an adult to just close up and sit there and be happy.
How much time do people have on their hands to be moving docks from lake to lake in the summertime? I'm just wondering.
No, I think it's like a Craigslist thing. Somebody puts a boat lift up for sale, or he buys a new one or a bigger one, and
Okay.
What about the issue, with nets? I mean, you got bait nets for catching minnows.
The minnow guys all have to go through pretty extensive training and coursework and testing and certification every year in order to operate in infested waters.
And what about the fishing nets? guys get done with those?
Like the nets we use for surveys or anglers nets?
Nets that are used for netting, those.
The ones that we use for surveys?
Not true, the ones that are used in Winnie for commercial fishing.
There is no commercial fishing on Winnie.
Well,
You know what I'm talking about, though. You're not the only guys putting nets down in Winnie.
The subsistence netting you're talking about.
Oh, subsistence netting?
Yeah. So are those nets being checked?
I don't know, we'd have to check with DRM on that.
But I mean, because we're just kind of spinning our wheels. I mean, I'm more willing to do all I can, but if everyone is on board, are we gonna have?
Well, I can't speak to how the band handles everything with their netting. But if we watch these infestations and people report when they see zebra mussels, and I hope this sounds okay, but we don't see a mass group of lakes infested with zebra mussels on the Leech Lake Indian Reservation. So if we were going to make the analogy that the band is moving zebra mussels with their equipment, wouldn't we see the infestations on Portage or any of the other lakes that they use heavily with their netting? So I guess what I'm trying to say is we shouldn't probably lay blame if we don't have any.
Questioning it.
Yeah, we don't see that movement at this point, so I can't say that they are or are not any more culpable for any movement than we are, or liable or likelihood of moving.
Well, the bait people, what do they do? Is there a way they can sanitize do something to the nets before they use them in another lake? I mean, they can't leave the net dry for a week. Don't they need their net, you know?
Commercial bait guys have to tag their equipment.
Yeah.
It can only be used in specific, whatever their permit allows them to use it in. So there is no taking it out and moving it around. That's where it gets used.
What about everybody's landing net? That carry them? In the boat?
Theoretically, but like Rich said, the veliger is a pretty fragile state, and you're going to leave that net lay on the bottom of your boat. And you guys know how fast does that thing dry? It's drying pretty quick. You drive, if you're going from lake to lake in the same day, just like your boat, it would probably carry some veligers if you have water in your. So it's a possibility. It is.
Okay.
Well, next is Winnie fish population, so if we want to talk about fish. Okay, I said we're going to talk about fish populations, not just fish, walleyes. That's what seems to get more attention than the other fish do. So, first thing we start with is our assessment nets. We have been netting Winnie on an annual basis since 1983. This graphic presents our gill net catch per net from 1983 to 2017. The vertical axis has the number per net and then the years. The green line, that's what we call the third quartile. The red line is the first quartile. Basically 25% of the values are down here, 25% are up here, 50% are in here. We consider if it's within that interquartile range that this is average. This would be well above average, and this would be well below average. I have it separated by when we started the slot. So this is the pre-slot limit. This is post-slot limit, 2 different slots in there. And we have an average pre-slot and an average post-slot. So a question that I've heard is, or a statement I've heard is that the slot limit wrecked Winnie. Well, the data doesn't indicate that. The data indicates that there were more fish in the system with the slot limit in place than there were before the slot limit came into effect. Another thing, we're going to flesh this out a little, so please, not too much scoffing right away. According to our assessment nets, the population was doing just fine through 2016. we have a pretty strong population. 2017, we see an extremely large drop in the gillnet catch. Now, that level of drop, for it to have a 50% drop with the harvest rate that happened on the lake in 2017, the protected slot that was on the lake in 2017, doesn't seem likely, doesn't seem realistic. So I suspect that we had, during the assessment, for some reason, fish movement, clearer water, so they shied away from the net. I don't know. I suspect that the level's lower than it was in 2016, but not as low as we see here. But now we'll get a little bit deeper into this. This is just fish per net. There's all different age classes that are within that number. First, I want to give you a second to read this. Yeah. And then maybe ask you, anybody that wants to be brave, guess when that was written? Anybody want to venture a guess when it was written?
Half hour ago.
And that's a good answer, because based on what we're seeing on Winnie right now, it could have been written a half hour ago. But let's take a look back at the gillnet catch. That was written in 1999. As we were proposing, that's part of our proposal for the slot limit. You see that big downturn in gillnet catch rate? You see this little downturn in gillnet catch rate? I don't know if what happened here is happening here, but this isn't the first time this has happened. So now, on to, where are we? What is the makeup of that gillnet catch rate? What does our fish population look like? Again, this graph is very much like the other one, except this is the index of walleye year class strength. So we compare one year class of walleye with all of its predecessors. We use 3 years, consecutive years of sampling to evaluate that, to put a number to it, because of what we saw earlier, that gillnet catchability changes over the year, or over the years. So we need to use 3 years to get an average of those 3 years, so we get a more accurate representation of what the year class strength is. That's why 2015 here, it's only 15, there's no 16 and there's no 17. And 2015 only has 2 years of sampling, so that's not a complete measurement yet. That will likely change up, because the older a fish gets, the more catchable it is in our equipment. So we'll likely catch more of the 2015 year class next year than we did this. Now, on to the historic part. We've got the same thing. We've got the first quartile, the third quartile, same here, first quartile, third quartile. Similar results to the gillnet catch. We have more strong year classes, which would result in more fish being caught in our gillnets during the slot limit period than we had in the non-slot period time. You see these year classes, how low they are in here? That's what resulted in those very low gillnet catch rates we saw in the previous slide. Now to the present, which most people here right now are probably concerned about. We have a period of low recruitment, and that's what you guys are seeing. This is the 2013 year class. You guys are feeling or seeing less small fish out there. There are less small fish out there. We have a couple of weak year classes that result in less small fish. The 2013 year class, Winnie growth rates are through the roof. They're off the charts for a lake at this latitude. Those fish right now average 19 inches long. They shouldn't be that big, but they are. So those fish that you saw and caught a lot of last year, those 19 and a half inch fish, that's that 2013 year class. Okay. Tom's comparison. Cass Lake and Winnie. This is an index of year class strength from Cass Lake and Winnie, and I have to apologize here. One thing I was going to do that I did not get done. You see the axes, the vertical axis? This one goes up to 200, this goes to 2.5. Well, there's two different methods that are identical except for this scale, for evaluating walleye gear class strength. On this one, a 1 is equivalent to 100, 1.5 is equivalent to 150. So it's the same data, it's just using a little bit different method to compute it. We take a look at the year classes that we have. We look at Cass Lake. Look at their 2015 year class. Compare it to what a weak year class is. Look at Winnie. Compare it to what a weak year class is. 14, 14, 13, 13. The reason people are catching more what they would call keeper-sized walleyes on Cass Lake is because the Cass Lake walleyes now in that 13-year class average just under 16 inches long. This graphic shows growth rates for Cass Lake in the green, Winnie pre-2015 or through 2015, Winnie 2016 and 2017. Now, some might say, well, somebody doesn't know how to age those fish. It's been me since 1989. It's the same guy. So either I'm getting senile or it's the same.
I vote for the senile, Gerry.
So the Cass Lake fish are the same fish that Winnie has, but they just aren't growing as fast. It's a less productive system. Their fish don't grow as fast. And Winnie fish are growing faster than they used to. So backing up a little bit, Cass Lake, week 2015, Winnie, borderline week 2015, 2014, Cass Lake just above week, Winnie just below week, strong 2013, Cass, strong 2013 Winnie. If you were to take and put those superimpose those, it's almost the same population. Okay, so this is a pretty good representation of what you guys are feeling out there, and it kind of shows growth as well. This gray in the background, this is our number we catch total in our assessment over time, and it's by length. So this gray area here, all that gray is the average from 1983 to 2016. The red bars are what we saw last summer in 2017. You see the length? Does that void match your fishing results? But now we take growth into it. We compare the pre, which would have that average growth, with the current that has the very fast growth. These fish in the old growth would be back here. So it's a function of weaker year classes and very fast growth that's making us see less young fish in the lake. But the year class strength doesn't differ from our upstream neighbor, Cass Lake. So that was the last walleye slide. Questions about the Winnie walleye population? Yes?
Yeah, two. One is, why are the walleyes growing faster?
Food.
And my second one is, since they grow faster, why do we have an 18-inch slot?
Okay, very good questions. Why do they grow faster? Now, this takes a little bit of speculation, but it's based on the data that we have. We have those weaker year classes. Anybody that's fished out there knows we have a heck of a population of bait. So we have less competition from those younger year classes. We still have the other fish in the system. They have more food per individual. It's easy for them to get a meal. They just sit down there and chew, and it's not only are they longer, you see how fat they are. And they fight like crazy too, because they're healthy fish. So that's likely why they're growing faster. Second half?
Yep.
But the second half of your question, you had a second question.
Why do we have an 18-inch slot?
Okay, let's think about our population as a whole and consider that 18 to 23-inch slot our bank account of walleyes. That bank account is flush right now. it's ready to produce interest, a year class coming up in the future. If we tap into our bank account and spend it down when things are right for that, we won't have any interest for that year class coming up. So it's good to keep those fish protected at this level. If we had good recruitment coming up, I'll use another neighboring lake. Leech Lake has pretty good recruitment. If we had that level of recruitment, I'd say we don't need to protect as many fish, but right now we do. Yes.
So we're holding. How about the stocking on Winnie compared to what it used to be, like say back in the 60s and 70s? You know, Andy Haniel was an old pilot around here, and he could fly over there, and he said he could see the schools of fish on Winnie.
You can probably still see lots of schools of fish, but they're shiner minnows out in the middle, you see. But the stocking, specifically the stocking, we stock 10 times more.
Where's the other 90 go, Jerry?
All over. Most of it Minnesota. I think occasionally there's something that goes out of Minnesota, but we send about 600 of those quarts down to Glenwood every year. So they get raised. A little thing, the way Minnesota's set up, we're up north where it's cold and we have a relatively slow growing season. Down south, they're warm and they have relatively long growing seasons. We stock fry into ponds to produce fingerlings. We get a little bit of nothing out of it. They stock fry into ponds to get fingerlings. They get a lot and they grow really well. So we have lots of eggs. They have a great place to grow fingerlings. We take the eggs, give them to them, they grow fingerlings, and then they get stocked all over.
Why don't we bring some of the fingerlings back to Winnie?
That's another question. We kind of expected that one, so we put our heads together and got a few numbers. We figured out how many fingerlings it would take to stock Winnie. It would take twice as many fingerlings as are currently stocked in the Grand Rapids and Bemidji areas combined in one.
Be spawned in that lake?
No.
Or you're 10% of what you take? What?
Let me, we have some information and some slides later on. Can I answer that one a little bit later? Okay, thanks. Yes?
Jerry, I have a suggestion and then a question. You know, since a lot of people are kind of deer hunters in particular, disgruntled about the amount of wolves, could we possibly live trap some wolves and train them to eat the zebes? Is that viable?
Give it a shot. Tell me what happens.
And I think this question's going to come up later, but first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for having us. You know, it's sometimes not an easy task to meet all us fishermen like this, but is recruitment the issue? Are there other variables in what's happening on Winnie?
My opinion, based on the data, is that right now it's a recruitment issue. Okay. And since you brought it up, I might as well say it. It's probably going to come up later. A question about Indian netting. It kind of already did as far as the transport of nets. The band has a right to subsistence net on Winnie, and we have a right to fish on the lake. And if you look at the history of the lake, we coexisted quite well. We all had the fish that we wanted until the recruitment starts to fail. Then there's less fish. We catch less fish. It's not because the Indians are netting. It's because the recruitment, there's an issue with recruitment, or recruitment is not what it was. Is that a natural event, or can we do something about it? That's the question. We know we went through this before, so it could be a natural event. But that's not going to stop me from turning every stone I can to try to figure out why it's happening and to see if we can do something about it.
So are there studies being done on how to get rid of the zebes? Like didn't it clean up Lake Erie? Didn't they filter it out?
Yeah.
But I mean, are we just, you know, is the horse out of the barn now? And do we still need these you know, well, I don't know what to call them, but as they inspect our boats? Is that still necessary?
It is, because there are a lot of lakes out there that don't have the zebra mussels on it. We need to do everything we can to stop that spread. If you look at the Mississippi, Dave put it this way the other day, and I kind of liked it, so I'm going to repeat it. The zebes are going home. They started in Brainerd, they came up here, they're back in the Mississippi, and they're going home. And there's nothing we can do to stop that movement now that they're here. Do we want that to happen elsewhere?
So on lakes like Winnie, are there still inspections?
There are.
But not
Heavily.
just for zeebs, it would be for something else?
Well,
like
it's
stony?
it's for any exotic, yep,
Okay.
yep.
And I think you make a good point. You know, keep in mind, you get an ecosystem change from a single exotic species. Now what happens if we had a second one? You know, what if spiny water flea shows up? And then what happens if a third one shows up? It becomes more and more challenging, the more of those invasive species that get added to the ecosystem. So I think it's as important as ever to try to keep new ones from coming into Winnie, and obviously trying to keep the zebra mussels contained to Winnie.
So is there any work being done to allow us to have better access to spot-tail shiners in the spring so they're not shut off before?
I'm gonna let Rich answer that one because he's been in the middle of that debate.
Oh,
Spot-tail shiners, harvest on Winnie, in relation to zebra mussels, any work being done to allow more access to those spot-tail shiners?
Well, that temperature study that I talked about on sand was pretty much directly related to that. To find out, Winnie hadn't happened at the point when we first started working on sand. We wanted to find out what if these temperature winds were accurately reflecting when zebra mussel spawning started. We found out that it's right around 60 degrees. So I don't know, I'm not going to go into the fish side of it. I'll let Dave do that. But so yeah, we've learned. We weren't just borrowing from Lake Erie or from Eastern knowledge. We went and looked to see what was actually happening in Minnesota in an attempt to.
Yeah, so instead of just setting a set date when folks have to be done harvesting bait, we're monitoring water temperature and allowing that harvest to continue so long as the water temperatures stay below. I think right now we're at 55 degrees on the permit, but we're evaluating that.
Change though to increase that take so that because a lot of times they're not spawning. There's no access to the shiners before that temperature is reached, so that the bait dealers can be doing something with bait before they're sold. Or is anyone even looking at that, or is it just we're going to shut it off? That's it.
Well, at this point, it's shut off based on temperature, but I think there is research going on, right, to see if there's safer ways to handle minnows where maybe we could get to the point where we could allow more harvest from those waters. And then the other thing that we try to do when there's bait harvesters that are interested is, you know, we try to work with them to open up other waters as well where there's shiner populations. Now, granted, Winnie's got one of the best shiner populations around, so it's hard to find some of those other lakes, but we are open to doing some of that stuff.
Gerry, don't they go through, I mean, the bait dealers, I know Bill is here, don't they go through a training and then they go through a situation where they were trained on how to, you know, to take care of their stuff, and when they take the shiners out, there wouldn't be any transfer of invasive species? They went through that training. I think Longville, I know he went through it, and 2 other bait dealers, but there's been no movement with it. I mean, why did they go through the training if they're not allowed to keep shiners past that, 56-degree water temperature stage? So why haven't they been able to do that?
It's a good question. I really don't have an answer for it.
Yeah. You're talking about the decline in the smaller fish or whatever.
Yeah.
It seems to be back about 2009. I have nothing against subsistence netting, but I snagged a net, an unmarked net in 09 Memorial Day, and it was 1,000-foot net or something. It was unbelievable, unmarked. I didn't know it was there. And I called the warden and towed it ashore. He had the individual come and get his net. Solid, full of fish, you know, white ones dead, green ones, but, and that was, you know, and that went on, that was the beginning operation Square Hook, you know, and that went on for quite a while. A lot of fishery biomass was taken out of that lake and sold to restaurants and sold to Red Lake. How long is it going to take with the stocking to get that amount of fish back in the west and south end of the lake?
Every once in a while, it doesn't matter what population of people you're talking about. There's some that do things the right way, some that don't. And that obviously was somebody who was doing things the wrong way. Occasionally, there's a net that turns up floating that, for whatever reason, was not tended to. That happens occasionally. Just have to talk about the averages out there and the rules that are there. You talked about Operation Square Hook. That is something that was widely publicized. At that time, the band members could legally set a 300-foot gill net in the lake. Since that time, they've tried to reduce it to 100 feet. Right, they tried to reduce it to 100 feet, but that wasn't passed. They did pass reducing it to 200 foot. The nets they were using were a whitefish net, which is a larger mesh net. The nets that they're using now are a smaller mesh net that targets smaller fish. Whether they'll catch fish in the slot or not, I don't know because I haven't tended nets with them. But the point I'm trying to make is the band took steps to reduce their footprint on the lake.
But wouldn't that reduce the size of the males, or the numbers of males in the lake if you go to a smaller mesh? I mean, we're dealing with that on Mille Lacs right now. And I think, wouldn't that take some males out of it, which would hurt allegedly maybe recruitment? I mean, when you look at, Gerry, when you look at the situation of last year, and there wasn't as many males in the nets, because I know I talked to a couple of people that were working there for the DNR, and wouldn't that kind of negate the number of males that would be available? Just hear me out. And I just want, there's other issues across the state, like Mille Lacs right now is going through similar things. When you talk about the 2013 year class, 2013 year class was the strength of walleyes in the entire state. That was the biggest and the best recruitment year that we had in many years. And, I'm just looking at this recruitment on the downside, and was it something that has to do with the males getting, negated out, or isn't it?
Not likely because, how can I say this? I better just say it like it is. A male will service many females. So you don't need as many males as you would females to produce a year class stream. They're the first ones on the spawning beds and the last ones to leave, kind of like guys in a bar. And I don't know who you talk to at the dock, but our numbers that we count the males, we count the females, we compare it from year to year. We didn't see a reduction in males. We did see a larger average size because the lack of recruitment, so we don't have as many of the real small ones, but we had as many total. And to tell you the truth, those of us up on the dock squeezing the males would rather not have 20-plus inch males squeezing because they fight.
So if 2013 was spread out across the whole state as a good recruitment year, so is that related to weather then? If that's accurate
That's a good
information.
Yeah. 13, if I remember right, was a very long, cold winter with a very late spring.
Latest I know.
Yeah, and that's something that we've seen in a number of the large lakes. They're the ones we track the most, so we see that data more frequently.
Or does it go back to when those fish were, when they would have been hatched as fried fingerlings?
Well, what happens often, environmental conditions, if you have an early ice out, you have rapid warming early, the water starts to warm up, the lakes thaw first, they thaw early, the water starts to warm up, the walleyes get into reproduction here, they get in there, they start to spawn and everything, and on those kind of years, Mother Nature usually slams the door. You have the real early warm up, the walleyes go into the spawn, Mother Nature cools everything off, the water included, and it makes a hostile state for a walleye to survive. Was there, yes?
I was just I tried to chime in on that before, but 2013 is the exact same year class they're trying to protect on Mille Lacs as we speak right now.
Exactly.
That is a high water table year.
Yes.
Mille Lacs is down, was down, and Winnie is still down in the same category. And we have the technology to twist that dam shut to keep our water table higher,
Hold
And
on
that'll-
to that idea.
Yep, yeah,
It's
we're-
coming up.
So he's gonna get to that, so there you go. Yeah, but Jerry, this is, here's the thing. I realize you guys are making a presentation. You got a lot of people in here that have questions, and it's no different than the Army Corps of Engineers controlling the water level. So if the guy asks it, you gotta answer it, not wait. Seriously.
Would you like me to answer right now, or can you wait a couple minutes?
Go for it.
Is that yes? Or do the presentation?
The short answer is yes, we're working with the Army Corps to control water levels.
I gotta get down to it. Hold on a second. Winnie, aerial view, satellite image, middle of the summer. You see all of that? That's all spawning rock that's high and dry. You see that little bit of brown in there? That's spawning rock that has water over it. That picture was taken when the water level on Winnie was at an elevation of 1,298 feet. That's how they measure distances above sea level. So that's 1,298 above sea level. I took a look at walleye year class strength versus the water level at ice out. Each one of these dots is a walleye year class strength, walleye year class strength over here, at elevation, and the dot is ice out. So if you look at the 1298 level we talked about, where you saw what the spawning beds look like, that's this green line. Everything to the left of this is lower water, everything to the right is higher water. You have 3 year classes, 33%, this is since 2000, that were above average year classes. You have 66% that were less than average year classes. You have above 1298 elevation, you have 83% of the year classes above average. You have at one data point 17% that's below average. This is a representation of the 2013 year class. You see we have a real rapid rise in water. We have ice out, walleye spawning, water level continues to increase and stays high through the incubation period of a walleye egg. We tested that data on all year classes since 2000, and that's what it came up to be. We went to the Corps of Engineers, said, hey guys, take a look, ladies too, take a look at this. They saw the data. They said, we can change the way we operate the dam. Went through the local office and then down to the St. Paul office. They agreed to change their water, their operation. Normally they take it down to this 1297 in the winter. They're going to come down to 1297.5 and they're going to hold it there. They're going to watch the snow. They're going to measure the water in the snow, evaluate what runoff will be in the spring, and if we don't have a lot of snow on the ground, they're not going to lower this. If we have a ton of snow and they think they're going to flood everything out, they'll lower it down to their normal 1297. Then they're going to watch ice out. They're going to aim for, now this is, you got to understand that there's a lot of variables in here. They're going to do everything they can to hit 1298 and rapidly rising at ice out, so that the walleyes have a good rock to spawn on, and that level will stay high during the incubation period of those walleyes. Like I said, I'm turning every rock. I'm trying to figure out what the heck's going on out there.
When did you go to the Corps of Engineers and state offices and talk to them?
Late last winter, early this.
So this is going to be in effect as of
this
ice
month.
out?
They're doing it right now. If you take a look at their website, you'll see that they've been holding the water levels at 1297.5 this winter.
Okay.
So, but you know, we skipped the ways up in the presentation. Are you guys okay with backing up and going through a couple more things?
Yeah.
Okay, I think we've exhausted the walleye population now. When everybody pretty much see what I'm trying to point out here. Okay, now in that walleye population, this goes back to a question about zooplankton. We'll cover that now. What do we need to make a walleye population? We've got phytoplankton, those microscopic plants, and we've got zooplankton that eat the phytoplankton, and then little fish eat the zooplankton, big fish eat the little fish. Some of all of this dies without getting eaten, and it drifts down to the bottom, or it gets excreted and goes down to the bottom and feeds the organisms that live on the bottom. What do we need to create a year class? First thing we need is enough female walleyes to put out the eggs to produce the young. So this is a representation of the pounds per acre spawning stock biomass, which I put up here as mature female walleye. Whoa, sorry about that. Our spawning stock biomass pre-regulation was very low. We put the slot limit on. The spawning stock biomass recovered nicely. We have a goal of 1.5 to 2 pounds per acre of spawning stock biomass. That's a healthy level for the lake to have. We accelerated up to that 2 pounds pretty quick. We kept accelerating. Oh no, we're going too far. 2015, we lowered the top end of the slot, raised the bottom end of the slot, allowed people to take more fish because we didn't need that level of spawning stock. What's happened? It's leveled off at or near 2 pounds per acre. This red line is what we call a 3-year moving average. So what we do is we take this year, take the 2 previous years, and take an average of those. And that's what the red bars, the red line is. That gill net variability that we know occurs. We don't measure the walleye population precisely each year. It might be a little high one year, it might be a little low another year. That's what affects this. So that's why we have the 3-year average. And we're running right about where we want to, right about what's healthy for the lake. So those adult walleyes are going to create a lot of these little fry. And one thing I wanted to show you, see that little guy right there? See the big fat belly? That's its yolk sac. That's what it lives on for about its first 5 days of life. So these critters, when they get in the lake, have about 5 days to find a good food source. What is that food source? It's zooplankton. Now this is 3 different lakes that have been sampled since 2012. I'm going to walk you through it because it's a little bit confusing the way it's laid out. I would have put this better, but the person who is the keeper of this data is on vacation. I couldn't get the data, so I had to just go with some canned graphics. You see this red line? Now, I bet none of you can read this. It's way too small, probably. Well, this is the number, this axis over here is the number of zooplankters per liter of water. On the left graph, we have Winnie. That's 50. This red line is 37. So in 2017, we had 37 zooplankters per liter of water. This red line in the other graphs is also 37 per liter of water. If you look at Cass Lake, Cass Lake's never been anywhere near as close as high as the lowest level on Winnie. You look at Leech Lake, the highest level ever measured on Leech is equivalent to the lowest level ever measured on Winnie. Leech Lake has good consistent recruitment year classes through this time period, has plenty of zooplankters to support those walleye fry. Winnie's had plenty of zooplankters to support the walleye fry. Okay, after the fry stage, they grow up, they get to the point where they eat fish pretty rapidly. What they need typically is very small minnows or young-of-the-year perch. Young-of-the-year perch is a preferred food for a walleye. You chop one open, lots of times perch comes spilling out of their bellies. The orange bars here, we've got number per seine hole. So this is how we sample them. It's in seine. It's a 100-foot net. I don't know, some of you have probably seen me do it out on Winnie. We have one person standing on the shore. We wade out in the lake, the 100-foot seine, and then we walk a 90-degree arc back to shore. In that little distance, 100 foot back to shore. Whoops. Did I go hitting the wrong buttons here? This is an average per seine haul. we're averaging probably 1,000 small fish per seine haul. That's how much small fish food there is in the lake. You look at the blue line, this is sorting out just the young and deer yellow perch. So we look at the time period here where we have poor recruitment. We look at the time period where we have good recruitment. 2009 and 2010 are strong year classes. We have plenty of young and deer perch and other small fish food for the walleyes as they grow in that fingerling stage in their first year. Now, there was a question about perch earlier. I said I'd get to it later on. This left graphic here, this is perch that are less than 7 inches, so from about 4.5 to 7 inches that we catch in our gill nets. 1990 to 2015. We take a look at the movement over time, draw a line through the middle of it for average. It's no different than it has been. And anybody that's fished out there knows that there's a heck of a lot of small perch in the lake. This is just putting it in a form where we track it over time and put some numbers to it. Now, you look at the same data set, but this is the perch that are 9 inches or larger. And you look at it over time, and you see it fall off. We have plenty of small perch. We don't have as many large perch. But when you're talking about the building blocks for a walleye population, we've tracked it through the zooplankton for the very smallest walleye, the small minnows for those fingerling-sized walleye, and adult walleyes feed on the young and deer perch as well. And through the larger prey items, and there's everything there for a walleye year class. And that's if you look at the growth rates, they wouldn't have those growth rates if they didn't have plenty of food. Okay, questions on that section?
So you're saying there's plenty there for a walleye, but there's no walleyes?
Yeah. Not no walleyes, but there's less.
Less, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's your forecast, Jerry? What's your personal forecast
You
for
really-
Winnie? Come on, grab
You
it
know
from
that
there.
oak tree and that dead limb, and you know out there where it gets about this big, you want me to stand on that thing?
That's why you take it. That's what you get paid for, to answer the question. What's your forecast? You know the job, I don't. Tell me what you think.
My problem with making a prediction, I've done that a lot in my time in DNR, and that's because I've had a solid database to stand on to make those predictions. We have zebra mussels that have brought a whole new element into it. And the water clearing, which is another element, we've changed the habitat that the walleyes are living in. How they're interacting in that system could be completely different than it used to be. So making a prediction on 2 years of data is really difficult.
Well, then I guess I would guess from what you're telling me it's not gonna get better.
No, I can't say that. We haven't.
Well, how long have we had zebra mussels?
4 years, 2 years.
How's fishing gone during that time?
Well, okay, fishing I can predict during the day while the sun is high in the sky for walleyes is going to be very challenging. When the wind blows like crazy, when it's cloudy, when it's early and late, it'll be better.
So how's 90% of the fishermen that fish during the day, not at night? How's the fishing gonna be for those people, would you guess, based on our stats from zebra mussels?
Walleye fishing is going to be tough, and if I was those folks, I would go fish for pike and perch because the pike fight very well and the perch eat very well. And the pike eat pretty good too.
Yeah, but Jerry, Winnie's been known as a walleye lake for generations and decades, and I think, I think he has a very good question and a very liable question. I mean, there's some issues going on with the lake. I think everybody here understands that. The presentation shows that. But fixing a problem doesn't happen overnight. But I really believe that the lake has got a problem, and I think a lot of people here do too. There's a lot of good fishermen in this room, and going out at night is not going to satisfy the guides. If the resorts want to send their people out at night, that's what they want to do. That's not a good marketing position. But we got to understand that if there's a difference in what you're going to do in the next 2 to 3 years, whether it's stocking, whether it's something that you can tell us here what a plan might be in place, then I think that's what we just need to hear a little bit about, you know. I mean, I think that's what, you know, categorically, that's what you gotta tell people. You have to tell them.
I'd like to jump to the next section, don't you?
Well, you know what, Jerry, I've been at this for 18 years on committees, and I worked really hard on this stuff, and there's a lot of lakes that have a lot of problems, and we try to fix it. You know, I was gonna ask you about Leech Lake real quick, and I'll be done, but Leech Lake, we're gonna, hopefully, maybe we're gonna change the slot. And it was a presentation that not only the DNR did, but we as a committee did. And to, you know, go to, you know, 1/20 and change their slot from the 20 to 26 because the spawning biomass is too large.
They're well over 3 pounds per acre.
Well, it was, I think, 2.75, but the thing is where's Winnie at? Are we at 2.5?
No, we're at 2.2. I'm pretty sure Leech has been over 3.2 the last 3 years. And that's part of what pushed the.
Well, I was just at the meeting 3 weeks ago and it was 2.75, which, you know, we're talking very small numbers, but the thing is they're going to open it up to harvest some bigger fish. If it passes. So is that something that, and you know, the thing is mentality, what have we learned and what have we taught people over the years? We don't want to keep a lot of big fish. We don't, I mean, that's been a generation of changing the whole way that we have done things. And we don't want people to keep a lot of 25 to 28-inch fish.
But we measured that on Winnie. We asked people what they were keeping, what they were catching, and we found out 40 to 50% of that is now being kept of those fish that are above 23 inches. So people are utilizing those.
But Jerry, that's because they're not catching the 50 to 60.
Well, that may be.
I mean, they want to go home.
Well, they got to keep something.
The guy says, not going to eat very good, but I'm going to eat it anyhow.
Somebody brought up a comment about walleyes eating other walleyes, like the cannibalism that goes on the lake. So if it's not the fact that it's the fry, because they have enough food in the system, it seems like, and if the perch aren't depleting that supply, what's depleting the supply of fry then in the lake?
Very good question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it could just be that there hasn't been the opportunity for the fish to spawn because of the low water levels. And if that's the case, it's a habitat issue. And you can't fix a habitat issue by changing harvest or by stocking fish. That's not going to fix those issues. You have to identify a problem before you can attack the problem. And that's where we're at right now, is we're trying to identify the problem so we can figure out what tools are best to apply. I like Tom's point about Leech. They are looking at changing the slot limit, but their situation is different. They've got spawning stock biomass that continues to increase, and they predict that it'll keep going up because they know they have new year classes coming into the system. We don't. We think our spawning stock biomass will go down because we don't have new fish coming into the system. Think about it if you're on a road trip, right? You're driving your car, and you're going down the road, and every so many miles you're going to stop and you're going to fill your gas tank, right? And then all of a sudden you come across an unexpected detour and you get sent down a desolate country road, and you've gone a ways and you look down and your gas tank's half full, and you don't know when the next gas station's going to be. Well, our slot limit gives us a reserve tank of gas. That's the fish that are in the protected slot. That's the second half of our gas tank. So the question is, we don't know when that next gas station is. We don't know when the next fill-up's going to be. Do we want to put the pedal to the metal right now and burn up those fish, basically get bad fuel economy? Or do we want to wait until the next gas station sign? And we can talk about it. We can do either way. It's really a social decision. Do we want to, we know there's social gain to allow those fish to be harvested, and that's fine. We can explore that. But is that worth the biological risk of driving down the biomass to the point where we can't produce a good year class anymore? That's the question, and I think we should explore that. I think it's a great idea to explore that. But biologically, that's where we're at, and that's why we're different than Leech Lake right now.
Well, Dave, what happens when you roll the dice, the two of you? And I know you're not going to be around much longer, but you roll the dice and it doesn't work. I mean, but that's, you know, that's the chances that we always take. I mean, we always change those chances. But, you know, that's the thing. And I think, you know, even with Mille Lacs, you know, it's the word hope. And I think everybody in this room is hoping that you're correct and hoping that the things will turn around. Because if it doesn't, we're going to be right back here in 2 more years.
Does anybody know where Leech Lake's water table's sitting at or has been sitting at?
Well, Leech Lake's different because they've got a much broader band of spawning habitat, so their water level can go down, and they've got habitat at deeper waters. We don't seem to have that in Winnie. And that's probably why, even though we've had these early springs and different weather conditions, it seems like Cass and Winnie are reacting differently than Leech is
Well, in a nutshell,
reacting.
Winnie controls Cass, correct?
Yeah, to
Well, it
an
can,
extent, right?
if they hold water back enough, it will back up into Cass, but most of the time, Cass flows into Winnie and isn't backed up. But there are times when Winnie does back up into Cass.
Well,
There's, just a second, there's a gentleman that's back there, he's probably got a sore arm, that's probably why he put his arm down. He's been waiting a long time.
Everybody in here wants to catch more fish. You know, I've been living in this county for 75 years and started catching fish when I was 10. You took the electronics out of fishing, everybody catch more fish, except just a few guys catching all the fish.
Thanks.
That's these guys, they run around this lake, they won't put them in or they want to only find fish. And electronics.
Well,
Technology's made us more efficient.
yeah, I think it's just one more example of how things are changing. You know, certainly we know that we've got zebra mussels now, our water clarity's changing. We know that we're getting longer growing seasons, so we're seeing expansions of things like largemouth bass. It's a good thing for bass anglers. We know our technology's changing. So we're definitely going through a period of change, absolutely. And that's why I like the idea of having conversations like this and doing adaptive management. You know, let's look at these things. Let's try to balance the social and the biological and move forward in a way that we're all comfortable with.
Does anybody keep track of the netting?
No, it's not tracked, and we don't have the authority to do it.
Okay, so 30 years of living there. For more than half those years, we didn't see camps. We didn't see campers come in the spring and come in the fall and coolers and coolers and coolers of fish coming off the lake every day.
That, you're talking about the user developable and access, right? That, I agree, that one is newer. The west shore has been, you know, that Ravens, and coming up Mississippi River, West Winnie, that work's been there for a long time.
What I've seen and experienced, they didn't like they used to show you. And I think there was a threat until Square Hook that maybe it was, they could get in trouble. Now they don't mind rubbing it in your face. They'll show you all so I wonder why we don't look at it and see what it is.
I'm gonna venture a guess, and I hate to do this, but make a little comparison between Mille Lacs and Winnie. That is a right that the Indians have, and that is regulated by their Division of Resource Management and their hierarchy. We don't have the ability to regulate that.
So I'm not saying regulate.
Where's the
know
checks
what
and
it is.
balances? Where's the checks and balances that you're saying?
Just,
Line?
yeah. Just
Well,
know
I
what it
think
is.
it's.
Well, it would help you guys with your data. You guys could spin your wheels. And
Okay.
check your nets and check everything else, but there's this huge variable out here.
We do.
I'm not a scientist, and let's take politics aside. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
if you want a full grasp of what's going on with an ecosystem, with a lake, you need to know all the data.
And we're
So
missing
you
a lot.
guys are all
I
getting
think we're
paid out
missing most of it. Honestly, I
everybody's
think we're missing
taxpayers'
most of
money, which is great. That's you guys do a great job. If you can't see the full picture, you're going blind. You're wasting your time.
Well, we
That-
work.
and I know you guys don't control that.
But we work
Right,
closely with the band. One thing, I don't want anybody here to think that the band and the DNR are two completely independent entities. We work with the band, and there's 2 meetings each year with the area office, the regional office, and the band. And they've been supportive in things that we've done. And then I can't speak for band members, but think about it this way. If you were a band member and you were reliant on those fish for some of your sustenance through the year, would you want that fishery to go to heck? So I think they have concerns about the fishery as well.
All you gotta do is look at Red Lake, that'll tell you
Red
there's
Lake,
the answer.
Go back to what they did to Red Lake.
And you know what, truthfully, a lot of those fish leave that access on Red Lake plates. So, and so I don't get that either. Right? But those are actual facts.
Right, and we totally appreciate your concerns. I mean, we really do. It's just that we don't have the authority.
And so I wasn't just focusing
manage
on you
that.
guys.
Right.
My question was more broad than that. Is
No,
there anybody looking at it? Does the band look at it?
We
The
tried.
fish that are coming out of the lake?
Yeah, we tried a long time ago when John Ringley was the head of their Division of Resource Management. And an attempt was made to get some numbers, and it turned out to be a very large task, and it didn't work out.
I will say that that was in a time frame though, that they were hiding it.
Yeah.
Now they want to show it to you.
Well, and it's something that we can readdress. I mean, we do have an upcoming meeting with their Department of Resource Management, so I'm happy to carry that message to them.
We have the checks and balances with our law enforcement, wards and whatnot, where I'm responsible for my limit, anything over, he's gonna have a conversation with me. It's gotta stand true for everybody. I understand the treaty, I get it, but him and I go out and say we only brought in 100 pounds. Did we? I mean, if there's no checks on it, back to how can you guys possibly give me a picture that's accurate when you don't know what's happening on the other side?
I'm not disagreeing.
I'm not belittling you, Gerry, the DNR.
Right.
I'm just saying, how can you do your job and give me good numbers
Well,
and say,
see,
this is
that's-
pretty close?
That's where, when we went through the graphics about the year class strength and our gill net catch, it doesn't matter how the fish are being removed from the lake. Our gill net catch tells us what's left in the lake. Well, that is, from year to year, that tells us. And that graphic, during most of the time period, showed that there was plenty for whoever was harvesting and however they were harvesting. The problem now isn't that there's too many fish being taken out of the lake. The problem is that the recruitment isn't there to replace those fish. So I don't want anybody to blame anybody else, because we all take fish out of the lake, so we could all say we're all to blame. But those numbers, the data we collect, indicate it's not a removal problem, it's a replacement problem. And that's, I think, where we need to put our energies, is figure out how to get the lake to start replacing.
I like the water thing. And I mean, the water, raising the water is, nobody in here has ever complained the water was too light.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to make too.
As water gets too low, and there's limited habitat on the shoreline, why not create habitat further out? Rather than worry about how much snow there is, how much water you're holding back. Create these rocky areas further out into the lake, then know they do a lot of shoreline reclamation and saving, they keep the rock on the shore.
That's the rock you're talking about.
Why not extend it out?
They put millions in it.
So then it wouldn't be such a big deal.
I don't know exactly how we do that, but again, if we've got enough spawning rock and we can manage the water level such that that spawning rock is covered and the walleyes can use it, and we know that they can reproduce well on that, which we do because they have strong year classes, wouldn't that be a lot cheaper and maybe better fix?
Yeah, but I pay a lot of taxes, I wanna see my money put. It'd be a good place to use some of this money to expend that. To worry about high level, low
Yeah.
level, that it would be there. That's why
Um,
licenses every year.
Okay.
I mean, it's just a thought.
Yeah, it's a good thought. It's definitely something that might be worth some more investigation and looking into. Yeah.
Jerry, you ever think of doubling what you put in, Winnie, 1 year? Instead of putting 10,000 in, put
Yeah, we've actually
double it up?
We put 17 million in, and we've done, see, that's what we get for skipping ahead. Now I got to go to another graph. That one.
That's right.
Okay, what if we put more walleye fry in the lake? This is all Winnie data. What we have is our year class strength over here, and we have our total fry per littoral acre. So a littoral acre is any acre of water where the water depth is 15 feet or less. That's the productive zone. We took a look at the total fry density. Now there's two different things that make up that total fry density. One is the wild fry, what the fish produce naturally themselves, and the other part of it's the stocked fry. So in the old days, we used to stock every year, and we used to stock a lot every year. So we had a large wild fry density. Then we did an experiment. What happens if we stock less fry? So we stocked less fry and just had wild fry. So that resulted in less total fry. In the old days, all we saw was this. It was a shotgun pattern. There was no pattern to anything. It was just, you know, there was no statistical validity to it. You could say it didn't matter what you did. Well, then we stocked less and we stocked more. You see this line here? That's a line that basically is a regression line that statistically draws the midpoint. Down here we have 1,000 total fry per littoral acre. You watch the curve, it comes up, it reaches about 1,100, and then it starts to fall off. Remember, this area where it starts to go down is more fry. A total of 1,000 to 1,100 fry in the lake per littoral acre is, if you want to call it the sweet spot. We're managing for 1,000 fry per littoral acre right now. We started it last year, stocking the 17 million into Winnie. That added on to the wild fry production, which comes from that spawning stock biomass and a mathematical formula you probably don't even want to look at, but that's from real data. Shows us that this is the sweet spot. This is where we should have the fry to have the best chance to have a strong year class.
Would that be 2013, Jerry, that high spot?
This high? No.
Or, no, down there where you're just recircling.
In
Right
here?
there, yep.
Well, no, this is an average of a bunch of years. That's all of these years, all of these years, all of this stuff, and drawing an average through the middle of it. So the high spot is a combination of a bunch of years.
Well, I was just seeing your 97 to 16, and I was just kind of doing the math as the high spot being that 12 to 14 area.
Yeah. And the reality of it is, we found this to be fairly consistent on a lot of lakes. So in the most recent version of the statewide stocking guidelines, the recommendation for fry stocking is 1,000 per literal acre. What we found in most of the lakes where it's been looked at, if you go beyond 1,000, you just don't, at the very least, you get the same result. In some lakes, you might actually get a worse result. And the theory is that if you have too many young fish out there at one time, it affects their growth rate. And then they're small in the fall, and their overwinter mortality rate is high. So you just don't get good survival till the next spring. So there's a biological limit to how many young fish a lake can support at any other time. It seems like that 1,000 per literal acres getting toward the upper end of that biological limit in a lot of lakes.
We skipped past. No, we didn't really.
You know, Jerry, that water level thing is quite interesting. Was that low water in those springs, were those the years we had poor recruitment?
Yes.
Okay. So I think you've answered that question for everybody here.
Okay. One thing I had in my notes was that I don't want to create any false hopes here too. This is one thing that looks like it has some hope, but it's not some magic potion.
No.
Nature is still going to make it so that we have variable year class strength. Just because we manage the water levels to be at 1298 or higher doesn't mean we'll have a strong year class every year, because the lake can't support that. It's just the nature of the beast. There's only so much room for walleyes out there. Right now there's plenty of room for walleyes, so hopefully with a little different management, we'll see another year class. But some other things that go into the making of a strong year class. One thing we've seen on Winnie and other lakes is that when we have that later, colder spring, we typically get a stronger year class. Well, a later, colder spring is often because we have lots of snow and lots of ice, and the snow being on the ground in a later year that melt could cause higher water levels, which makes us see a higher water level as being an indicator of a good year class. But maybe it's that late spring and the spring warming rate that's affecting the walleyes just as much as the high water. So it could be multi-pronged. The thing that we can measure and that we can look at year class strength is the water level. But it may not be just water level. It may be that variation in water temperature that we talked about, driven by weather events. That is likely a big driver as well. This may just be one piece of the puzzle, but what we're doing here is we're taking humans out of the equation. We're making sure we don't do something that could take what would be a strong year class and make it a weak year class.
Can't you only change one thing at a time in any kind of scientific experiment, I'm thinking?
If you want to figure out what.
So what is the one thing that's gonna be, is it the water level now this year, that's what we're gonna look at as like an independent variable by itself?
Well, it won't be independent because we did change our stocking regime.
So
But those are the two things we changed because those are two things that we had the ability to change. And no, to answer your question, will we be able to say if we have increased recruitment, which one of those were
the natural
definitively
thing
the
is
reason?
always the one
Probably.
mixing, right? But I think you'd want to reduce all the different variables and try to keep it to one at a time.
That is ideal, yes. Yeah.
Talking about recruitment being down, what role or impact do zebra mussels, because they obviously attach to hard surfaces, which is essentially walleye spawning habitat in some cases. Is there an impact? I mean, because we're talking about adding rock and substrate, we're essentially adding zebra mussel substrate as well, but will they spawn on zebra mussels or within, amongst zebra mussels, or does it lower?
Two-pronged answer to that one. In lakes to the east where they've had zebra mussels longer, they've done that work and they've found that viable eggs are laid on the spawning or on the zebra mussels, and those eggs do hatch. But the second part of that is that Winnie shoreline habitat and the spawning rock being so close to the shoreline, that all freezes in the winter. So you'll have zebra mussels that will build on it during the summer, but during the winter it freezes. Then you have the ice scouring in that big bowl as the wind moves the ice around. It tears those zebra mussels off and it cleans the rock, so they have nice clean rock to spawn on in the spring. Yeah.
Gerry, I want to give you guys a kudos. I don't know if people have caught this, but you guys stocked 16 million in 2017, which is basically kind of double, if not triple, other years. So people need to hear that you guys are aggressively doing replacement for that fish population.
Thank you.
Yes.
Exactly. And that's the tough thing with trying to measure recruitment. You really can't tell for sure until they're about 3 years old. Because the first year they're so small that a lot of times they'll swim right through the gill net. We do try to do some seining, we try to do some boat electrofishing, but that's more challenging with the clear water. Now they see the seine coming, they can see the lights of the electrofishing boat. So we don't know if our sampling rates are the same as they used to be, just because the water's more clear now. And the water clarity hasn't been there long enough to really have time to figure that out.
Dave was on the front of the boat last year as we were electrofishing, and he's watching at the edge of the light fish that are swimming along in front of the lights. So we're working on dimming our lights.
And you've got to be probably within 4 to 6 feet of the fish to shock them. And these fish were, I could see them 20 feet out in front of the boat getting out of the way. I couldn't tell if they were walleye or not. So.
You have to work at night.
We do.
Yeah, that's why we had the light. Yeah, right.
Those deer river cops are really diligent. At 2 in the morning.
That's why they have lights.
Yes.
What's a typical distribution when you're stocking lakes? How does it work as far as you're going to different landings and dumping so many in different spots?
Oh.
You go to on the lake and dump
Yep.
out the majority of them, or they spread out?
Last year, we had 2 boats, one stationed down at the Mississippi River Inlet and one stationed up at Cutfoot. We split up the fry each day with each of those boats, and we took them out in the lake, and we dumped them at various spots all around, so we had complete coverage around the perimeter of Winnie.
Have you always done that?
No, last year was the first year, but that's what we'll continue to do.
Yeah, prior to that, we did spread them out to multiple locations around the Cutfoot Lakes, but we weren't going directly into Winnie. The old way of thinking before we used to measure zooplankton densities was that Winnie warmed up too slowly and there wouldn't be zooplankton out there. And that's why the earlier fish managers thought that it was best to just stock into the Cutfoots. But since we started doing the zooplankton sampling, we found that there is indeed decent number of zooplankton out there at the time that the walleye are hatching. So there's no reason not to put fish directly into Winnie. Because it's hard to say what your mortality rate is by the time they work their way through both the Cutfoots into the big lake.
Is there any data on that from any other lakes, or has it been studied anywhere?
It's starting to be studied, and we're learning more all the time. We are finding that even at very small life stages, these fish will swim a long ways. And an example would be, we did a fry marking study in Sand Lake, and we found marked fingerlings and bowstring in the fall. Upstream. We didn't think they'd move upstream when they were that small, but they do. And in Big Lake, how far are those fish showing up in the Bemidji area?
Well, they're stocking them in a small lake next to Cass Lake, and they're finding them in Cass Lake, they're finding them in Wolf Lake, they're finding them, they stock them in Andrusia, they're finding them in Pike Bay, they're finding them up in Kitchie, and that's fingerlings when they were stocked in Andrusia as fry. And anybody that knows the Cass Lake chain, that's a lot of swimming.
You find more plankton in the areas like, say for example, birdhouse or salt sand, there's no rock. Do the zebra mussels get up in that sand areas too? Or are they out in the, where there's more substrate, something to latch on?
Yeah, I think the thought is that they need a hard substrate to start out on, but eventually the zebra mussels will build on zebra mussels so they can expand out into areas that traditionally had a soft bottom. The extent to which they'll do that is probably going to vary from lake to lake depending on what habitats are available. And when we first found them in Winnie, we're pretty confident that they were moving around on driftwood. That's where we first found them.
We had divers in the lake, took them to all the rock spots around the lake, even out, rock fence out in the middle of the lake. Didn't find any zebra mussels on any of those rocks. We got a report from an angler that he had caught a piece of driftwood with zebra mussels on it. So we went out, Rich and I went out, and in 3 feet of water we went cruising around and started at the Mississippi River inlet. Every piece of driftwood that we checked on the south shore had zebra mussels. We didn't think they'd live in there because that's in that ice impact zone. We thought that they'd be cleaned off, but that driftwood must truly drift, and that's where we first found them.
Are we going to lose the car beds in the lake then
From the starry Stonewar?
Yeah.
or from the zeebs?
Oh, the zeebs are on the hard bottom. Well, the zeebs are on the hard bottom. They've expanded to where they're covering basically every hard bottom. We have the Cara as one element, but we have a very similar, the starry stonewort as another vegetation that's out there, algae. The starry stonewort is expanding tremendously, so there appears to be plenty. The zeebs are growing in hard substrate. The Cara is growing in more of a marl substrate, so they're not going to directly compete. And it doesn't appear that change in water chemistry that we talked about, total dissolved solids, doesn't appear to be affecting the Cara to this point.
I read this many were sturgeon dying at 34%.
In a sturgeon, did you say? I don't know. I know that red-ear sunfish eat them like crazy, but it's too cold up here for red-ear sunfish. Freshwater drum eats some, but I don't think we want sheephead in Winnie. So I don't know about the sturgeon though.
Are there other biological controls?
There are other biological controls out there, treatments. However, in a lake like Winnie that's extremely large and connected to other bodies of water, especially other bodies of water that have zebra mussels, isn't going to work. The only place it's really worked is a little lake that was like a mine pit that they treated with Equinox, and it killed the zebra mussels. But they've tried it in the other lakes in more discrete areas of lakes, and it hasn't killed them.
Well, treatments are different than biocontrol too, and I know you're talking about some of the fish.
Well, Equinox is a biocontrol, yeah.
I thought I read that smallmouth will eat them and maybe bluebills, some kind of ducks will eat.
Yeah.
Bluebills will eat them.
Yeah. As they've done more research, they are finding that more and more fish will eat them. So whether the fish can eat them at a rate that would actually control the zebra mussel numbers or not, I think that remains to be seen. But there are some fish species that are figuring out that they can utilize the zebra mussel. I've heard of it in yellow perch, smallmouth bass, I have heard of it in sturgeon, but I don't know to what extent they eat it. Like Gerry said, the red ear sunfish in the south will eat them. So maybe it just takes the rest of the fish community a while to figure some of this stuff out, to figure out that they can utilize the zebra mussels
Have
too.
they seen like populations plateau like in eastern lakes? I mean, they run out of habitat.
Yeah.
Is there other things that cause them to plateau or recede and then they
Well, what it probably is, every organism in the lake has a carrying capacity. So there's the biological capacity to support the organism. And what typically happens when something gets introduced is you'll get an introductory effect where the population goes really high, and then it exceeds that carrying capacity, and the environment can't support it anymore, and it'll come back down to some level and level off. That's kind of what they typically see with zebra mussels, right, Rich? Yeah, and I know with a lot of introduced species, that's a very typical trend. And we don't know where we're at on Winnie yet. We don't know if we're still on the upswing. It's really too early to tell.
Just a thought about control. Consider these two. Produce 1 million eggs a year per individual. $700,000, this is in Lake Michigan, per square meter, times 1 million per individual. Think about the number of little veligers that can be produced out there. I think we should, other people are working on the control end. Right now, for this group, it's more how do we adapt to them? They're there, we're going to have to deal with them, how do we adapt to them? And we're looking at whatever we can do to try to increase the recruitment. If you look to these,
I think people in here would just like to see though, like, we want to know what the movement is in the right direction. Understandable, it's going to be the same fishing it was ideally next year as it was this year. Right?
Yep.
Probably. But I think it's nice to be informed what you're doing to move in the right direction. Each and every, you know what I mean?
yeah, and that's why Dave and I set this meeting up. There's some of you here that have been exposed to this information for a long time, but there's a lot of you that have never seen it before. And we thought there's a lot bigger audience out there than some of our resorts and guides. So we wanted to let you guys see what we're seeing. And if this is a hit, if people want to do it, we could do it annually at about this time.
Yeah, or even whenever people just want to come in and meet with us, we're always happy to do that too. But certainly, if people are interested, we'd love to talk to you.
You talked about zebra mussels, but what about spiny water fleas? What if we get spiny water fleas in Winnie? What about other AIS? What's that going to do?
Well, that is, 1 is bad, 2 is worse. This depiction is mussels and how they change the ecosystem. If you add if you add spiny water flea onto this equation, what's left of the zooplankton have even more pressure because a spiny water flea is a large zooplankton that feeds on small zooplankton. Those small zooplankton are what the young fish feed on, not just young walleyes, young fish. So now you could have less minnows, less perch, which equates to later on less food for your larger fish and less if they grow large enough to feed on those perch. At first, they aren't going to have as much zooplankton to feed the very young, the fry walleye.
So it could get a lot worse.
It could get a lot worse.
Are all these invasives coming over via shipping through Duluth?
Initially, that's what's suspected.
I mean, like the spiny water flea,
Yep.
all these different ones.
The evidence indicates that.
And if that's the case, you know, it seems like it all comes down to us. Now we're trying to do something about this. While the shipping community just keeps doing their thing, are they addressing the ballast water?
I think there have been rules.
Instead of keep bringing more stuff?
Not in the last 9 years.
Yeah, I think they have rules now where if they leave a freshwater port, they have to exchange their ballast in salt water in order to kill those organisms so that they don't bring them in. Is that correct?
Yeah, and this, Rich, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been 9 years since a new invasive species has come in through the Great Lakes because of that ballast water swapping.
So is this freshwater ballast that they have in their tanks when they fill up over there and they're bringing freshwater ballast, not saltwater ballast into Lake Superior or Duluth Harbor?
That's the
Freshwater
thought, yeah,
ballast
yeah.
from
So
gas.
when you flush with the salt, even just the flushing will help, but the salt water's gonna
Is there
create
some kind of
environment.
salt water, salt pill, salt, alka-seltzer tablet we can throw in our bilges to kill them, the water that we're sloshing around our bilges all the time? I mean,
All sorts of
if
things,
something kills them, because you got the boat manufacturers, have you talked to them about redesigning their bilges so they actually drain, you know, the supports down in the keel, move them up so you don't get all that scum and plug them up, so boats will actually drain out.
Well, there's a couple of things, I'm glad you brought that topic up, because there's a couple of things people can do. One thing I did with my boat is, you know, your ball on your hitch, a lot of people have a drop. And if you take a look at when you're on a level surface, you have your boat sometimes with the bow down. Well, mine was that way. So all I did was flip that over so it was a rise instead of a drop. It lifted the front end of the boat. Now all the water in the bilge is draining out the back. Another thing that people can do that isn't talked about much, you think about the way your live well system is built. You've got an inlet, water gets pulled in through the pump, distributed throughout your live wells, bait wells, and then goes down through a pipe in the bottom of the boat that you can't see and out the back, right? Well, most of those inlets have just a little screen on them. That's just a threaded fitting. You can just spin that off, take your water hose when you get done with your fishing trip while everything's still wet. Put your water hose up to that inlet, turn on your pump. That will pump that fresh well water or city water throughout your system. It'll flush the entire system. It'll go through the intake, down into the live wells, bait wells, and out your outlet. And that's one thing. It's not hot water. It's probably not the ideal thing, but it is better than nothing because that water that's trapped in there is now exchanged with fresh water. So those are a couple things that we as anglers can do to try to help reduce that spread.
Isn't there something about tilting your motor down also to let the water drain out?
Definitely, and if you're as fastidious as I am, you tilt the motor down, you start it for just a second, your water pump is wet, it's not going to seize up, and it flushes that last little bit out. And just a vroom off.
Well, I see we're getting close to 9 o'clock, and we certainly don't have to end our discussion, but there were some folks that had submitted some written questions. And I think most of these have been covered, but there's one really good one that I thought we should probably address. And the question states that why are lakes Oneida in New York and Lake Winnebago in Wisconsin and Lake Erie such good walleye fishing lakes when they've had zebra mussels for 10 to 20 years?
I wish I could answer that as an expert on those lakes. I can guess that those lakes have gone through periods like this where they had poor recruitment, especially during the early phases, and that those zebes have reached their carrying capacity, maybe dropped off a little bit and allowed a little more recruitment if zebes are the limiting factor. And that's one thing that's common in just about any lake that gets zebra mussel. Their walleye year classes, the strong year classes, become spread out more. And it doesn't matter what lake you look at. You have strong year classes spread out more in that early stage. And that's something why I caution the water level. We're doing what we can, but I don't want to say that's going to be the absolute fix. If this is zebra mussel driven, we just have to wait for nature to cycle through because we don't have a cure at the moment.
I think, you know, Jerry, I think two issues here. One, great point about the water level. I think we got to really look at maintaining that. I think this has been a real issue for several years, but really lately. And if we got bad recruitment over those 2 years, I think it's something that we got to definitely, you have to get with the Corps and say, you know what, we need this, and have a substantial agreement with them. The other thing is, you know, Lonnie brought up a great point. You know, I realize that tribal subsistence netting is here. We don't really want to talk about it most of the time. But the thing is that the people understand that fish the lake a lot, and we know what comes out of there. Anglers take their share, but the natives also take their share. At Red Lake, we have we have a level of, you know, what we do is we analyze how many fish are coming out on both sides, and that, you know, gives us an idea, or gives them an idea of how many fish can be harvested. Down at Mille Lacs, they have a totally different situation with a federal decision. But, you know, how do we know? And we don't know. And I think you're going to have some type of conversation with the tribe in the future with Leech Lake of approximately how many fish do they feel is coming out, or they need to monitor it. And so we have an idea, and so there's some type of equality here, because, you know, there's something going on in the lake. I know you're not going to fix it in 2 seconds, but those are issues that I think a lot of people here are concerned with. And I think it's in the right direction, and I think we need to do that.
Well, unless things have changed, Leech Lake, when I seen it, had as many nets in it as Winnie or more, and that fishing is still good there. I think myself, Winnie, is, you gotta change your tactics quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
You can't fish clear water like you do dark water. That's the big thing.
Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I think, you know, the only thing is it's hard for people to change. You know, you got to understand that. You know, I mean, anglers are anglers, and it's hard for them to change their commitment to what they're doing. It'll happen, and they'll be forced to do it. But these are things that we have to look at: the water levels, and we have to look at possibly a maintenance between the two parties. You know, to find out how many fish are coming out. When you say there's as many nets in Leech Lake, I don't disagree with you at times, but I'll tell you what, there's a lot of us in this room that fish both bodies of water. And I talk to a lot of guys on Leech, and I don't hear that, you know, that number of nets being on the lake as I do on Winnie.
For a few years, but when I stayed down there,
yep,
there was nets all the time.
Well, it hasn't been as bad lately. So.
These are good concerns that we can bring up with the Department of Resource Management for Leech Lake. And like I say, we're going to be having a meeting in a couple weeks. Like, that gives me something to discuss with them, certainly.
I'm not against their subsistence fishing. I'm not against it.
Yeah.
When they got netted and got sold up to Red Lake and just their cart and them out, you know, that did a lot of damage to that lake, I believe. You know, at least I'm glad to hear you're starting to put some smoke, you know, you're stocking around that. It's a long time to swim and cut with the southwest corner.
Do us a favor, guys. Don't wait 4 or 5 years for another meeting. All right? Do us a favor. Because I think this was really good. I think you guys did a phenomenal job putting stuff together, make people understand. But don't wait 4 or 5 years again.
Yeah, I think this was great. So yeah, absolutely. If folks are interested in having another meeting, you know, maybe a year from now or even less time, I'd be all for that. I think this is outstanding.
We might have to get a bigger room.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
We'll work on that.
Does anybody want to end this on a positive note?
No. It's not all negative, Jerry. It's just, you want suggestions? We want to hear what you got to say. And I'll tell you what, there were some great suggestions tonight. I think terrific stuff to go by. And I think that's the thing. Everything isn't going to be, you know, thumbs up all over. We know that. But I think it was a great meeting, and I'm glad so many people showed up, because it really shows their concerns, but it also shows your concerns of what you guys want to do too.
Yeah, thanks. We have one more question in the back.
Are you guys all familiar with the cormorant and pelican rookery?
What took so long?
It's got slides, don't it?
Man, I'll tell you.
Yes. We don't have a rookery.
That birds never used to be here.
Well, I've been here since '99, and the migrating cormorants that are on Gull Point have been there every year that I've been here. It's a late thing. They're starting to migrate. Some young are leaving their nests, and there's a little movement that comes into that Gull Point area. The pelicans, they seem to have lived in from what I can tell, they're juveniles, and it's not a rookery, but they seem to live over by Stony Point. You know, those rocks, they're out of the water, and they're always up on the rocks. That's a very short-term thing that, based on everything we know about cormorants, is not likely to have much of an impact. They're likely going to be feeding on the perch, and those small perch that we have a bunch of. So they're not likely having a big impact. just because it's a real short-term thing. Now, last year, there was a bigger group that moved into Cutfoot. But again, that was a migrating group, and it isn't a rookery. We don't have young. They aren't feeding on the lake all year long. It's just a short window in the fall. The pelicans. You were going to let me get away without talking pelicans, weren't you? Pelicans in Cutfoot, they have been increasing. That's another migrating group. They're here for a short period. Unfortunately, it's while the walleyes are spawning, and they do take some adult walleyes out of that Cutfoot run. Nobody likes to see it, but again, it's probably not a significant impact on the walleye population.
We mentioned before, obviously it's changing as far as how it's tracked.
Thank you.
Are the changes not coming up to the houses, right? Or are they there, feeding? What's staying in deep water for the legs of it?
I think it's all of the above. I think part of it is that they probably do spend some time in shallow waters. It's just harder for us to sample them there. But I also think that they'll spend more time in deeper water, especially walleye, because they thrive in a dark environment, and if they can go deeper, they're going to find those darker habitats. So they kind of have the option to do that. But definitely water clarity is going to affect fish movement and fish behavior.
But you guys got a feeling for depth that this can be taken from and still have a good chance of survival?
Yeah, we have an idea, and I don't have a number off the top of my head. But what I generally tell people is shallower than 20 feet is a lot better than deeper than 20 feet.
That's what I said.
And I know there's been studies done on rainy, and we could probably come up with a better number than that. But as a rule of thumb, I like to use 20 feet for most fish species.
Is it zero survival?
No, they found even some fish would survive. The deeper you go, the higher the rate of mortality though. So there's a big difference even between 20 feet and 30 feet, and 30 feet and 40 feet. You know, it ratchets up pretty quick. I don't know what the depth of 100% mortality would be.
There's a break line, 1 atmosphere, and that's 1 atmosphere of pressure, that's at 30 feet. And that's where what they call a barotrauma occurs, where the expansion of their air sac pushes their stomach out their mouth. And that's at 30 feet. So you never want to exceed 30 feet with a fish that doesn't have a connection between its air bladder and its throat. And that would be your walleye and perch and crappie and that type of thing. Crappie seem to be wimpier than walleyes.
Last question, Jerry, is the northern pike thing going to come into effect on Winnie this year?
Yes, it's going to come in statewide this year. And thank you for leading into the positive note.
Oh, thanks, Jerry. Yeah.
There's our pike population on Winnie. It's doing nothing but going up. So lots of pike. There's a lot of pike that are a good average size, better than most lakes, quality fish in the fishery.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll see you sometime. I hope you like
I can't believe